My name is Sasha Carlson. I am the Executive Director of the Association of Chartered Accountants in the US. I would like to introduce our panel this evening, where we will be discussing highly relevant topics to our members here in the US and stakeholders from around the world. We will talk about the status of the mutual recognition agreements, of which there's been a lot of progress in the past couple of years, as well as discussing future skills that we as professionals need in this rapidly changing world.
Welcome everybody. Today's panel is a discussion on future skills and the MRA. It is divided into four major topics: mutual recognition agreements, the professional accounting qualification and the competitive landscape, topic 3, megatrends and the impact on the accounting profession, and future skills is topic 4. I'd like to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves.
I'm Tasha Batstone. I'm the Senior Vice President of External Relations and Business Development at CPA Canada.
I'm Ronan O'Loughlin, Director of Education and Training at Chartered Accountants Ireland.
I'm Mark Allison, Executive Director of Education and International at the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Scotland.
I'm Ken Bishop. I'm the President and CEO of the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy, NASBA.
I'm Vernon Saw. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Institute of Chartered Accountants, England and Wales.
I'm Simon Grant, Head of Membership for Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand.
And I'm Chris Easton. I'll be the moderator for today. I'm the incoming Vice President for ACORS in the US. So we're going to jump right into the first topic, which is the Mutual Recognition Agreements, or MRAs for short. So we get a number of questions from our ACORS members about what we refer to as reciprocity, the recognition of their chartered accounting qualifications or their CPA Canada qualification in the USA, and the process to qualify as a CPA here in the US. This is a complex question, and we're not going to get into all the complexities today. And as it involves separately negotiated bilateral mutual recognition agreements between the accounting bodies, each with different terms and conditions. State board requirements in the USA add to this complexity. We have asked our panelists to give a high-level insight into this complex subject as it relates to their accounting body. And as the regulator on the panel, Ken, I'm going to ask you to lead us off on this. Ken, can you give us a quick update on the status of new and existing MRAs? And secondly, how are these and renewed agreements different from past MRAs?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me say that I'm really pleased with the tremendous progress that we've made this year in mutual recognition agreements. I also want to give credit to ACOS for part of that initiative. We had a friendship for a long time with ACOS. I'm talking about the U.S. regulators, but that's really ramped up in the last 5 years, and we've had a really strong working relationship, including the sharing of data and information that has really led to maybe a more trusting environment for us to get down some new paths that we didn't foresee 5 years ago. I'm also excited to say that last night we signed an MRA with the Chartered Accountants of Scotland, ICAS, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Scotland. That is historical. That application came into the United States almost 25 years ago. And during that period of time, it was nearly impossible for there to be an agreement between the United States and the United Kingdom and other countries because of the grave disparities between mostly experience requirements between our country and other countries. So we're very pleased to have that in process. I think that we're going to be able to leverage the negotiation that we did with ICAS to make it maybe smoother sledding as we begin the initiative of talking to other institutes in other countries coming up in the near future. Another progress, late last year we signed what I would call an improved renewal with our friends in Ireland. We've had a long-standing reciprocal relationship with them, but we instituted some of the new ideas in MRAs, and really the first attempt to do that was with Ireland, and we worked through that process very successfully. We also, in January, signed the North American Agreement with our friends in Canada and Mexico. We were in Mexico City. It was a great opportunity for us also to revisit our agreement and talk about new ways of improving that agreement in the future. We're also very close to agreements with Australia and New Zealand, as well along in our discussions with South Africa. Again, tremendous amount of momentum in a relatively short period of time. And very important to us is we are now in discussions with the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales. We are so appreciative of their willingness to let us get through the ICAS agreement to work out the kinks that we could so that we would have a lot of momentum when we went into our discussion with them. So my appreciation to Mike and others for giving us that flexibility to do that. As to your second question, how are these new MRAs different from the past MRAs? In 2016, I first announced at an ACOS meeting in New York a new initiative we called Unilateral. And we did that based on the knowledge that we were never going to be able to get mutual recognition agreements with other countries. I say never, at least not in the short term, again, because of the different requirements, particularly coming out of the European Union. So internally, we began a discussion about how could the United States move the ball down the field. And what we decided is that we were going to initiate unilateral, which meant we were going to come up, do an appraisal of our counterparts around the world, and know that they were going to be able to come in the United States and practice through unilateral, and knowing that U.S. CPAs would not be able to enjoy that same right and privilege going back the other direction. It wasn't all sacrificial for the United States because we desire to have the best of the world come to the United States and practice the CPA. So it wasn't completely an unfairness issue, but there was also the issue of U.S. CPAs saying, why can't we reciprocally get the same privileges that you're giving the rest of the world? And that began that discussion. It was because of unilateral that we actually ended up where we are, the current agreements with Ireland and the one we signed with Scotland last night and what's happening with Australia and New Zealand, is that we understand that mutual recognitions don't necessarily mean they're equal agreements. They just mean that there's an agreement where we have mutually agreed to terms. And in those agreements, we have, because of unilateral, decided that it makes more sense for the U.S. CPAs to have some rights and privileges, even if they don't have all the rights and privileges. So we identify clearly the gaps between what a CPA from the United States can do, say going to Ireland, and also the gaps that Ireland or someone else might want to see the U.S. to close coming the other direction. And our agreement is to try to resolve or mitigate those differences during the term of the agreement. Now, I can tell you we had some people on our side that wanted those to be almost punitive in nature, in that we would put some type of sunset or some type of clause that said that if we don't want to achieve this, if we don't achieve this, then we will nullify the agreement. And I would not support that. I mean, we had already agreed to unilateral. We'd already agreed on the desire to have, the chartered accountants of the world to come to the United States and others. So it didn't make sense to put in the punitive clause, but we also know that if you have a trusting relationship with the people you have agreements with, you'd expect people to step up and do the things that we said we were going to try to do. And that's where we are. And we look forward to those discussions. So again, we know that changes with Brexit have altered the conversation some in the UK. Right now, most of the exclusions that won't allow a more balanced reciprocal agreement are because of some of the terms of the EU, and particularly in experience. And so we're also having discussions with the EU about how we can potentially mitigate that also through our State Department and others. So again, a lot of movement in the past couple of years, and significant movement is going to occur in the next year and the following year. So some of the things that we were talking about that I would use the word dreamed about 5 years ago or 3 years ago, particularly when we really put a commitment to moving forward, have now occurred, and it doesn't seem like the momentum is going to slow down anytime soon. So that's my answer. If there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
Okay, well, thank you, Ken. I'm going to move on to Mark, and Mark, the new US ICAS MRA has, as Ken described, significant gaps in practicing privileges for US CPAs practicing in Scotland and the UK. How does Scotland intend to address the state's intent to mitigate these gaps during the term of the agreement?
Ken, thank you very much for your opening comments. The mutual recognition agreement that we signed yesterday has at least 25 years history, but actually we had files in ICAS going back to 1961 of initial conversations, which I'm pleased to say was actually before I was born, even though some people think that's when I joined ICAS. We've had a hugely positive response. We did a soft launch to some of the large employers in early February, and we've had over 30 people already respond to that. And yesterday, when we made the announcement, we've had 20 inquiries. These inquiries have come from US CPAs who are based in the United Kingdom and who've already been working in the UK as audit partners, but not being able to actually sign certain particular audit reports. So we already have evidence that there will be US CPAs benefiting from this agreement very, very quickly. Equally, we have a number of very interested members in North America who have been contacting us. So we think this is hugely positive. I think the main approach that we took to the review was to use the principle of substantial equivalence. And substantial equivalence is very important when you're looking at two very different education and qualification systems, because my institute, ICAS, has direct control over a number of aspects of the programme. And equally, AICPA and NASBA have direct control over a lot of aspects of the total US programme. But all the organisations have some areas where they have less than direct control. And I guess when I look at the US education example, the US universities are very much standalone, accredited by national bodies, and AICPA and NASBA very much rely on the national system. In the UK, the institute itself would control all the education content. So if you try and actually compare the two systems, they're extremely different. When we then look at practicing rights, we then come into the issue that ICAS does not have as much control over practicing rights as our friends in NASBA and AICPA collectively do. So what we had to do in the UK was to try to exert influence over the UK government's position. The UK government carried out a line-by-line review against the European Union directive enacted in the UK Companies Act. And for much of that line-by-line review, they were happy to take ICAS's substantial equivalence assessment. But on certain areas, the UK government review, guided by their lawyers, was that there had to be an exact compliance with the Act. And as Ken mentioned, this exact compliance is in relation to some practical experience requirements. What we've agreed to do is a number of different features. Firstly, we're going to use the opening of the Brexit discussions as an opportunity to consider again whether we can open up the substantial equivalency of US experience. I tried very hard to use the argument that US auditing standards and the auditing standards used in the UK were substantially equivalent, and therefore the work experience gained in North America is, in my view, substantially equivalent to the work experience gained in the European Union. That, however, doesn't meet the line in our Act. Brexit changes that because the UK government has made it very clear that it is interested in trade discussions with many other countries now that the European Union will not be our major partner. And indeed, ICAS submitted to a UK parliamentary inquiry in November this year evidence to suggest that this was an unnecessary barrier, the matter in relation to US CPA's practical experience. And I was very pleased yesterday to find that one of the senior UK government ministers, Dr. Liam Fox, gave a very positive endorsement of our MRA signing yesterday. Liam Fox is the minister who's in charge of international trade and heavily involved in the Brexit conversations. His endorsement of what we've achieved so far, I think, will be a very important leverage for us to have further conversations. And indeed, I know his department have already reached out to us. In addition, I'm very positive that ICAW's discussions with NASBA and AICPA over the next few months will actually reopen this exact same hurdle that ICAS faced. And I think ICAW and ICAS together will have some very powerful arguments to take to the UK government. and I look forward to working with Vernon and his colleagues in seeking to achieve that. Although ICAS had the opportunity to move ahead with this agreement quickly, we did so with the full support of our colleagues in ICAW, and we look very much forward to them achieving a similar reciprocity arrangement in due course. Within the arrangement we have with AICPA and NASBA, we will have an annual review of the progress that we've made against the obstacles that you mentioned, and I'm very confident that in these annual reviews we'll be able to show to Ken and to his constituents that we are serious, that this is a long-term arrangement.
Thank you, Mark. Ronan, I'm going to ask you to comment on Chartered Accountants Ireland and their MRA in the same question.
Indeed, thank you. We've had an agreement with the AICPA and NASBA since 2003, and we were delighted to have that agreement, as Ken has already mentioned, renewed just last year. One of the different aspects of our agreement was that when we initially entered into our agreement, the ability to provide audit rights to US CPAs coming to Ireland was something that was within our gift to give and to make available to US CPAs coming to Ireland. Unfortunately, the EU Commission and the European Directive in that space, subsequent to that, meant that is a bit a barrier for US CPAs. Nonetheless, I would highlight for the fact that within the agreement that we've signed with NASBA and AICPA, we have recognised and provided fast-track access to membership, practice rights, excluding audit rights. And more importantly, I think I would highlight the fact that we have agreed and we've already commenced engagement with the Irish regulator IASA, and we will then go to the European Commission, hopefully with NASBA and AICPA, to seek for them to reconsider this issue. Like a lot of these developments, they can become political very quickly. From my side, I see huge benefits to all sides to having greater mobility and recognition of qualifications. The world we're living in is global, and our members benefit from operating and being free to work at the highest level in all of the leading global financial markets. So really, as a professional body, we are committed to working with NASBA and AICPA in that, as with Scotland. And despite the challenges that Brexit and others may throw up, we think there are opportunities in there. So we're very committed to moving this forward. And like Mark, we very much welcome the recent development for Scotland and hopefully for England and Wales very, very soon. And we think this is all very positive for our members. And I would finally just to say, for the individual members who may be zoning in, who are considering going down this route, sometimes you can find at a local level, you can run into slight speed bumps because some regulator doing their job, importantly as it is, might find some questions and so on. So one of the benefits of liaising with your own body and with the bodies here is that there are often clarifications, additional information. The first no may not necessarily be a problem. So it is always a matter of persistence and getting whatever information is required. And we certainly see huge benefits in doing that.
Thank you, Ronan. I'm going to move on to Vernon. The ICAEW and the US IQIB have begun discussions towards developing a MRA. How will Brexit impact the terms of any resultant agreement, and what is the role of the FRC in the process?
Okay, thank you, Chair. So we're very pleased, of course, that NASBA and the Scottish Institute have reached this agreement, because we're glad that the Scots took the first 25 years of the work, and we hope to settle in about 18 months. Well, so thank you very much. But on the serious note, it is a very important breakthrough for both sides, both here in the United States and for the UK. And I think it just demonstrates demonstrates how international the profession, the accounting and audit profession is. We work to international standards in financial reporting and auditing, although obviously there's a difference in terms of the financial reporting between the US and Europe. But we share so much in common that we're really pleased that this has taken place. We had a question there about how is Brexit going to affect this, and of course for those of us in the UK who are facing up to Brexit and its implications on so many fronts, if I had the answer to this, I think I'd be much sought after by the UK government on many other issues. But I think, as Mark has indicated, Brexit actually does give an opportunity to open up some of the issues where perhaps for expediency, as Mark and Ken have just outlined, we haven't really yet got a complete answer to. Obviously, from the point of view of members working in the UK, equivalence into Europe is a very, very important issue. But equally, equivalence into the United States is very important too. So I haven't got a complete answer. There has to be some kind of triangulation between those varying factors. But I hope that we will get through to an answer.
Great. I'm going to move on to Canada. Tasha, Canada has signed a renewed MRA with the US and Mexico. How did the Canadian reorganisation and the consolidation of credentials impact the process?
Well, first of all, let me say that I'm very happy to have renewed the agreement with our friends to the south. We've had a long-standing relationship with NASBA, the AICPA, and Mexico. So I think that was a very positive step towards solidifying that relationship as we go forward. Within the North American context, I think all the bodies involved recognize that credential recognition is very important in enhancing mobility, because we have such a highly integrated economy, and we need to be able to move people around effectively within the North American context. Within Canada, I think, as a result of unification, one of the things that came out that was very clear with unification is that any agreements that we negotiated going forward had to be inclusive of all of our members, and that included our legacy members as well as our new CPAs. And of course, that presented some challenges, I think, when we were negotiating the agreement, primarily because in Canada, we have a separation between membership and licensure. So an individual within the Canadian CPA program and within some of our legacy programs could train to be a professional accountant in business and not necessarily have audit qualifications. And then when you're looking at substantial equivalency with the US, where the qualification is basically an audit credential, that presented some challenges. What we were able to do, and I'm quite excited about this, was actually develop a top-up program that we offer in Canada. So individuals who perhaps didn't get the training in audit through their legacy credential or through the new CPA program can take this new program. It's called the Post-Designation Public Accounting Program. The PDPA has been accepted by the US and Mexico as an appropriate top-up program, and then they can access the credential, the US credential or the Mexican credential. So in this particular instance, I think working closely, developing a strong foundation of trust, understanding each other's programs, understanding what it meant to be substantially equivalent, allowed us to come to a solution, I think, that worked well for all the parties involved.
Thank you, Tasha. And finally, moving on to my home institute, Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand is currently working towards a renewed MRA. I took advantage of the initial one, thanks, with the US. How has the process changed from the previous agreement?
Look, thanks very much, Chair. Yes, look, I don't know why it's taken Scotland 25 years and England hasn't even bothered to try. We've had a great relationship with North America for, to be honest, decades, as you can imagine, Chris. So we're currently in a renewal process in relation to ours, and it comes back to something that Tash just said about the Canadian Institute. We merged two organisations in 2013. So we have a legacy organisation as well, which is both our old qualification from Australia and the legacy qualification in New Zealand. So as we work towards our new agreement, which we're hoping will be approved in the April-May period, that brings together those legacy programs, and then our new program going forward from 2013 to bring people into the frame to allow them to get their CPA designations over here. Our audit piece for the piece coming back from the North Americans coming back to Australia, our ASIC, our regulator, is the one who issues the audit ticket. But to almost qualify to become an auditor in Australia, you certainly need to have done either one of the accounting body's programs. So that certainly helps. The equivalence around all of that helps in that space as well around getting the audit ticket later on. It's really important that government to government talk to each other on these things. One of the great things about this accounting profession is mobility, and the ability for our young people and in the large firms to get opportunities to work overseas. And without our governments talking to each other around visas, and I'm very glad to say the American government has a wonderful visa program for Australians in terms of up to 3,000 people can qualify for an E3 visa, and that gets young people into this country. I was really privileged last November when we had a recognition award to one of our members in the United Kingdom, and he basically got up and said, and we don't get this thanks very often sometimes, I would really like to thank the organisation, the membership organisation where I qualified, which was in those days the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Australia, for the work they did in talking to the North Americans. I originally started my career in Australia. I then went to the United States and I think got a certificate or a ticket via the state of Iowa, and that gave me the ability to come to the United Kingdom with both qualifications and be a very successful partner in EYs over there. So the work that our organisations do in the background really enhance the mobility of the profession, the excitement of the profession, and I'm glad we're working towards our new agreement. Thank you.
Chair, can I just quickly respond to the provocation from my colleague from the Southern Hemisphere? I think it's not that we haven't tried. I think Ken very eloquently explained that we gave way in a very gracious way to the Scottish Institute. Because, it was obviously not going to be possible for all the UK-based institutes who wanted this to go at once. It would have made it far too complex. So, as Ken has described, the Scottish Institute has gone first, but we're hoping that they have paved the way. And one thing I just need to mention, of course, is that this is not completely or entirely in the gift of the ICAW in the UK, because we have a regulator, the Financial Reporting Council, and the FRC, I think, has been intimately involved with the agreement just signed yesterday between NASBA and ICAS. And I'm no doubt they will be intimately involved in our application as well. And we understand that they have their role to perform. But we hope that many of the issues that have been discussed between ICAS, NASBA and FRC, we will be able to say the same again. So, Chair, I will just put that on the record.
Well done, Vernon.
Thank you. Before we move on to other topics, I'd just like to throw it open to Ken and the panel for any other follow-ons or rebuttals.
I think we've had enough rebuttals, so let me just say a couple things. I think that what I've heard here today and what our stakeholders who watch this video later have an opportunity to hear is going to be enlightening to our state boards of accountancy and regulators, the spirit and the trust in which we have entered in these negotiations, knowing that they were unbalanced at the front end. It's exactly what I wanted to hear. Simon just made a really good point about his specific life and career and the opportunities that regulators and institutes long ago having the foresight to look at mobility and knowing where global economy was going and what that did to him. I mean, I really believe that what we're doing is going to make the profession more attractive and more available to more young people coming into the profession all around the world, just because of the fact that it's going to accommodate the type of global economy and lifestyle that they're probably going to be interested in having. So I think there's going to be benefits that when we started this, we were really talking about people who were already in the process, but I think there's going to be benefits to people entering the process that's probably going to be more profound and more impactful than those that have historically had the interest. So I appreciate very much all your remarks.
Okay. Any other comments on MRAs? Go ahead.
Thank you. I think if we're looking forward and setting ourselves a challenge in this area, all of us at this table have signed either MRAs or RMAs with each other, with I think one minor exception, which will happen very soon, within the last 4 months. My own institute signed in November RMAs with all of the institutes at the table here, which will last for the next 5 years, and obviously then yesterday the MRA with the US. The RMA process, reciprocal membership agreement process that we have, is carried out on a multilateral basis. So we review each other's qualifications every 5 years, and we do that collectively. The discussions that we've just had have talked about a bilateral process. And I think it would be an interesting challenge if we set ourselves to consider, could we actually move towards a multilateral process involving the US and maybe other parties in time? Because one of the things that I certainly discovered in having done a lot of the work in the detailed US review is the convergence between the CA qualification and the CPA qualification in a number of really important features. And the huge work that the AI-CPA exam team, supported by their NASBA colleagues, are doing in the sophistication and the testing is really fantastic to see, and really helps a lot of the equivalence arguments which in the past have been quite tricky to deal with. If we similarly can make that degree of progress in the practical experience differences that we've discussed, then we will get to the point that all of the institutions on this table are very, very close together, and we may be able to head towards a multilateral approach eventually.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. The next section takes a broader look at the accounting qualification in a more competitive landscape. So international accounting bodies and their members often comment on how to achieve mind share and what I call brand recognition of their qualification in their market. In the USA, the CPA qualification is well known and respected, and in fact is regulated to be the only recognised professional accounting designation. However, other qualifications like the MBA are heavily promoted and recognised as a path to senior management, and indeed my own son has embarked on an MBA program. In the Asia-Pac region, I know the Chartered Accountant brand is or competes against emerging qualifications out of Southeast Asia and China. And in all markets, the profession competes against what I call unqualified providers. These are providers without any real professional qualification. So leading into our panel, there's a three-part question which I'm going to ask Mark to kick off. What is the public perception of your brand in your market? And secondly, are there any competitive threats to the professional accounting qualification, again, in your market? And thirdly, what actions, if any, is your accounting body taking to promote your brand over other potential competing qualifications?
Chris, thank you. CA and Chartered Accountant are effectively the two brands that ICAS would tend to use, and the perception is very good generally of CA and Chartered Accountant in our market. I think we get a challenge against that perception when we have occasions of corporate collapse and potential involvement of auditors or senior members having been involved in the management team. But thankfully, these are few and far between. And we have very, very few disciplinary cases against our members from one year to the next. With our members working in over 100 countries, members have been able to use the Chartered Accountant and CA qualification as a passport. And when they've worked in countries where CA and Chartered Accountant is far less recognised, such as in the US, the agreements such as we've just described very much help create the equivalence of CA where CPA is dominant or where ACA or other designations would be dominant. So I think I'm very positive about the brand as it stands at the moment. In looking to the second question, on terms of competitive threats, very few of our members resign, and less than 1% of our members have ever carried out any other designation. So we get around 50 members out of 22,000 have ever done an MBA. for instance, a tiny, tiny number. So the CA qualification seems to be the designation that creates the passport, the insurance, the way that they can carry out their careers. And that, I suspect, historically very much might come from being a UK-specific situation. I don't see a lot of competition in and around the chartered accountancy space by other accountancy bodies as such in the UK, but I am aware that the CFA Institute in the financial services sector has started to really make some interesting inroads into the UK, and that's certainly something we're looking at. I think the real challenge to the Institute is less other accountancy bodies, but actually employers not recruiting as many of the talented young people into chartered accountancy or other great accountancy qualifications in the future, and potentially recruiting people to undertake cheaper and shorter qualifications with no professional affiliation or designation. And I'm pretty sure we'll come on to that later on in the conversation. In relation to what our Institute are doing around the brand and about that challenge, I think the most important thing our Institute can continue to be is to be relevant in everything it does. So our curriculum must be relevant. We will come on this evening to talk about changes in the effect of technology and skills. Our examination system, our education delivery needs to be relevant, but the services we give our members must stay relevant. And if we don't achieve that, we will start to see member attrition. So I think it's a very interesting time looking at the challenges in the profession, but the challenges to me, and I'm interested to hear my other colleagues on the panel's view, don't seem to be coming from other accountancy bodies. They appear to be coming through some of the other mega trends that I think the panel might go on to discuss.
Thanks, Mark. So just moving down the table then and cycling back up here. Ken, do you want to add anything?
Sure. Well, I think I'm pretty much in concurrence with what's been stated, and maybe for different reasons. As the regulator at the table, I would tell you that we don't spend a lot of time thinking about competition. We think about public protection. But they are not really controversially different, because we believe having an adequate number of CPAs in the United States is a big part of public protection. Again, part of the welcoming of CAs coming to the United States. And the other part of it is that we believe that there's always going to be an attempt to use confusing or misleading credentials to try to somehow imply to the public that they have the level of education, training, and experience that a chartered accountant or a certified public accountant have in the United States. And we're very protective of that. As the regulator, we regulate CPAs who either through culpability or competency have failures, but we also make sure that we are careful to make sure others don't try to put their nose under the tent and pretend somehow they're a CPA when in fact they haven't met the requirements to be a CPA in the United States. Another thing that's a little different in the United States is that we have a significant number of CPAs who in fact are MBAs. We have a lot of lawyers who are CPAs, we have a lot of MBAs who are CPAs, and more we're seeing even more diversity in the type of people in our profession. I sit on a board of directors for a college MAC program where 90% of our people that come in the MAC program do not have an undergraduate degree in accounting. They're engineers, economists, chemists, and they end up being CPAs in a world in the United States where we have changed the definition of a test to include a test as to the reliability of IT, sustainability, and other areas. We need the subject matter expertise that sometimes fall within other professions and other disciplines. So probably the biggest competition we have is for those bright students who are trying to be attracted to engineering and to other schools. So we have to make sure that we promote the profession. And I will say quickly, that was unprecedented for NASBA to ever say we're going to promote the profession, because we believed that it was somehow conflicted with our role as a regulator. But in recent strategic plans, we have decided that the competition for the best and brightest, the retirement of the baby boomers and other things that are occurring, we need to get out there and start talking up the profession in the United States to attract not only people from around the world, but people in the United States to the profession. So I think the competition is not from other accounting credentials or competing in the accounting world. Again, in the United States, less than 40% of U.S. CPAs are really auditors. They are financial planners, they are business analysts, they are working in government and in education and lots of reasons. So the diversification of the profession we think is a very positive thing for public protection and the public of the future of the credential in the United States.
I'm just going to take these questions in a slightly different order. Just start with the competitive threats. I mean, I think it's quite true to say there's always been a competitive threat to the ICAW and indeed to all our institutes. And it would be rather strange if we didn't acknowledge there is some competition between some of the institutes sitting on this table. But I think that's good because, we do believe that competition actually makes you do your best and always make sure you're relevant to the market. And so a good degree of healthy competition, I think, is absolutely fine. In terms of the public perception of the ICAW brand, it's interesting. We have coming up to 150,000 members in this coming March, 30,000 students in 150 countries. Some of those numbers in individual countries are obviously much smaller. So, in a sense, we're increasingly looking internationally at our brand. And one of the ways that we're attempting to do this is, whilst looking at the ICAW brand, we are trying to promote the Chartered Accountancy brand, and particularly through Chartered Accountants Worldwide. Now, this is a grouping of currently 11 active members who all have the Chartered Accountancy designation in their own jurisdictions. And the reason we've come together is we are realistic. We recognise that, as I mentioned earlier, that because of the increasingly international nature of the profession, because of the desire for young people to be able to work and to live internationally, that we have to face up to the fact that there are some very great competitor qualifications around the world. So we have come together as, at the moment, 11 active members in Chartered Accountants Worldwide to promote the Chartered Accountancy brand. Now, in that way, we hope that each body retains its own sovereignty and its own designation, but actually in its marketing, we can actually say we are part currently of the 11 organisations together of 1.7 million members and students. Now, that is a good proposition. If we go back 10, 20 years, I suspect that many of our institutes didn't really have a concept of brand or marketing. But I think we're all very well aware of it today. So that's the contribution that the ICAW is making.
Look, yes, I'd like to reiterate what Vernon said about Chartered Accountants Worldwide. We saw a perception in the market that the initial CPA, be they stand for whatever it stands for in different jurisdictions, was having some resonance around the place. So, we're part of the Chartered Accountants Worldwide group, and I think it's got some real potential in cementing the name Chartered Accountant around the world. And I say the word chartered accountant very distinctly because the word chartered has a great deal of resonance around the world. When you go up into Asian markets and you talk to international students, the word chartered just seems to resonate in their mind as something of substance, something that's hard to get. In those kinds of markets, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for sort of a step up. So I think we're lucky in that regard that we actually have that word chartered in our name. Interestingly enough, in our home market, talking of competitive threats, we've got other fine institutes who are niching this space. For example, we've got the Tax Institute in Australia, which is a fine institute, but just deals with sort of corporate tax and tax-related advocacy and membership matters. And, they've recently changed their qualification to Chartered Tax Advisor. So again, they have picked up on this word chartered and are using that resonance to, compete with us. And in many instances, our members are members of theirs as well, too, as they specialise in that space. So I think we've got to be quite protective of the word chartered in whatever environments we're in. We certainly operate in an Australian context and to a lesser extent in New Zealand context in quite a competitive environment, and we always always have, with 3 accounting bodies all vying for the best talent there is at our universities, it does become quite challenging at those universities' careers fairs when you're trying to elbow each other out of the way. But we do it on a friendly basis within country, and it's in what we call the spirit of co-opetition. But as Vernon said, it's good to have a competitor. It keeps you on your toes, it keeps you ahead, and it always keeps you thinking. So I don't necessarily think having competitive threats is a worry to us, but I think from a management perspective it keeps us on our toes, and that's what our members would expect. What actions are we taking to promote our brands? Well, generally speaking, it's in our domestic markets where we do that, where we assist our membership with signage. We've recently run digital campaigns where we see more value for money rolling through in that space, because that's where our young people are. They're talking on Facebook, they're linking it on LinkedIn. We are not likely to be doing above-the-line print or television terribly much. And if we do, it will be in categories where people watch, A-class and B-class decision makers and generally students, and in many instances that's in the sports environment. So, thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Back at this end of the table, Tasha.
Well, I think the Canadian experience over the last few years has been interesting because obviously we are promoting a brand new brand. So we have the Chartered Professional Accountants in Canada. And at the very start of unification, we made a conscious choice not to build upon the legacy brands, but to create something new and different. And that's where the CPA, the Chartered Professional Accountant, came from. We branded that very heavily in the marketplace. Over the past 5 years, we've had incredible success from that perspective. In fact, I was looking at some statistics the other day, and our unaided awareness campaign right now is showing us that we are in excess of any of the legacy brands. So in 5 years, we've managed to develop a brand that has more recognition than brands that were in effect for over 100 years in Canada. So I think that's a real testament to the work that our marketing and communications people have done over the past 5 years. The public perception of the brand is very high. One of the advantages coming out of unification was the fact that with one accounting body in Canada now, we definitely get greater recognition in the marketplace as being the accounting profession. It helps us in our discussions that we have with government. It gives us far more legitimacy in the space, and we're certainly seeing that in the kinds of stakeholder engagement that we're getting with a variety of different regulators, governments, and so on. Are there competitive threats? There's always going to be competitive threats. There's no question about it. For those of us who thought that we were going to eliminate competition in Canada through unification, there was a quick realization that there's always competitive forces out there. And again, as my colleagues on the panel have said, I think that keeps you honest, it keeps you focused, and allows you to continue to constantly be reviewing the environment to make sure that you stay relevant and that you're providing the appropriate training for your members. We see in Canada certainly students are obviously choosing other directions besides the accounting profession on occasion. There's some movement towards MBA. We're seeing a much stronger presence of the CFA in Canada. But we're also seeing great interest in the STEM area, so in science and technology, and a lot of our students are obviously moving into those areas. So we're taking steps to address that. We're taking steps to make sure that our competencies, that we're looking to make sure that we're covering the right competencies in our certification program, but also to make sure that our certification program is accessible to students. Canada's a big country, and the reality of it is you cannot just run programs in big centers. So we're investing heavily in online learning education and really trying to develop the sophistication of that online learning experience so students are getting the maximum benefit from being involved from that perspective. In terms of promotion of the brand, I think one of the interesting things that we're doing domestically is some really intriguing campaigns. Our most current campaign is about navigating change. And it focuses the role of the CPA not only as an accountant, but as a business professional, adding value in a business, not only from the finance function, but really as an integrated partner across the whole senior management team. And that has been very successful because I think that's where a lot of our members are playing the roles. That's where they are right now. It's beyond accounting. And in fact, when you look at our vision, it is really to be the preeminent accounting and business credential. And so we're very heavily focused on that, and I think that is really helping us as we go out and promote our brand, both within Canada and internationally. So,
Thanks, Tasha.
yeah.
Ronan.
I'd like to echo many of the ideas that have been already said. Our members would be primarily, about 70% of them are working in business, in leading roles, as CFOs, finance directors, chief executives, and so on. And as Tasha has said, adding, we believe, significant value. And that's one of the ways, and as Mark has alluded, when a public concern case arises, everybody in the profession is impacted by that. I think one of the strengths of the brand is the challenge that we put to our members to become members. And to me, one of the great things about meeting chartered accountants is we are generally very proud of our qualification. It is something we hold very dear and therefore very protective of that. And that is one of the strengths of the brand. And I think that is recognised both, as I say, what our members do in practice or in business. I do think there are potential challenges, optically at least, from other things like MBAs. But the truth is, our profession remains one where the predominant intake of members into the profession coming in as students are typically coming from university. And whilst theoretically you can go and do an MBA straight from college, we wouldn't be recommending that to anybody. The reality is you get the best from an MBA if you were to do that, perhaps 10 or 15 years post-college. So we're not competing, in my view, in that space. In fact, I would say the Chartered Accountant gives a significant fast-track career boost for our members. And many of them may or may not need to consider other designations. And indeed, post-qualification, we've done a lot in that space to strengthen and have additional awards to support our members as they progress in their careers. One of the areas certainly of challenge that we would see in Ireland would be that with a very rapidly growing multinational sector, high tech and so on, many students coming from college will look at other careers, potentially looking at seemingly very exciting. What we see, however, is very important, is that the chartered accountant typically, upon qualification, 2 or 3 years or whatever, out of post-college, is typically better placed to fast-track their career. So a career perhaps in, dare I say, a Google in Dublin might appear attractive in straight from college, but many of those students 3 or 4 years post-qualification will see their chartered accountant compatriots moving way ahead. And importantly, as we've talked about earlier, having the ability to move globally with the global designation, which is recognised, which I think is hugely important. So there are competitive threats, and they're coming from a number of different angles. We will touch later on the impact of technology and how that is changing. And certainly we see in the context of, as Mark has touched on already, potentially there are potential losses to the profession where certain core tasks that we do at the moment, like audit traditionally, if that was highly automated, the number of typical trainees coming in to our profession might well change quite dramatically. With that in mind, we're seeking to broaden our footprint and to tackle that by attracting students in other areas, growing areas within Ireland. So, but certainly it is a huge ongoing challenge. And as I said earlier, competition is good. We have to keep looking at what we do and how we can make and continue to make our qualification attractive. Like all the bodies at this table, we remain very active to promote the Chartered Accountant body within Ireland, obviously, and in terms of attracting new students, we would actively be very busy with social media, as I'm sure all the bodies are around the table. That is the way you get your message out there. That is an area that is changing very rapidly. But I don't think there's any room for complacency. The world is changing. The standing, if you like, of professional qualifications isn't something that we can take for granted. I believe we're in a very strong place, but I don't believe we can stop and sit on our laurels. We have to keep looking very hard. And I think this global dimension that we have here is one of those strong aspects that we can hold out to future trainees. And certainly when we're promoting to our students, we see this global mobility as something that is very precious. So we can't be complacent, but we have to work on and challenge ourselves at all times.
Thank you, Ronan. Before we leave this topic and move on to the third topic, I'm just going to throw it open to the rest of the panel if they have any further comments that follow on from the other panelists. No, great. So the third topic is about megatrends and the impact on the accounting profession, and we've touched on that through the first two topics. This is probably one of the biggest impacts on the profession. And with regards to megatrends, while brand recognition in the previous topic may be an issue in many of our members, there are larger overarching issues that impact the global markets, and these have been defined by the World Economic Forum as 5 long-term trends that contribute to change of the global economy. These are technology, economic uncertainty, societal, sustainability, and geopolitical. Vernon, if you could lead off in your research, what are the most important trends that you see causing change in our profession?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Well, we could all speak for weeks and weeks on this topic, but I'm going to just maybe try and be brief and just pick on one mainly. I'd like to pick on the societal issue, because I think one of the things that's really affecting the accounting profession around the world is this whole issue of the trust agenda, and also the trust in experts. I think this is just so important. We're living in a world now where skepticism abounds, and experts are being challenged all the time. We've already alluded to the fact that fairly infrequently, but with a lot of headlines, when something happens in the accountancy profession, even though if you look at it in perspective, it might be a very small percentage of what professional accountants, chartered accountants do around the world. It obviously has this effect of starting to undermine trust. When we look at the use of the term chartered accountant around the world, and Simon mentioned this, there is something about the chartered accountant that actually does and should stand for trust. The word accountant by itself, I don't think does that, and we may have a particular interest in this in the UK, because in the UK anybody can call themselves an accountant. You don't have to study anything to become an accountant. Call yourself an accountant, set yourself up on the high street and offer accounting advice on all sorts of things. It may be of interest to those watching this webcast that at the ICAW, an attempt to actually get legal recognition of the term accountant was first raised in 1907. So I can go back before 1961. But we've come to the conclusion over the last century that actually governments are not very interested in the UK. They look upon it as a restraint of trade. So actually, what do you do? Well, actually, we've already touched on the brand and marketing. You have to demonstrate by the quality of your members, what they do, that a chartered accountant is the person that you should be going to. We work to an ethical code. All the bodies on this panel work to an ethical code. I think one of the things that we need to do, possibly more as professionals, we need to get that ethical code out more before the media, the public, and those whom our members do business with, and to demonstrate that it isn't just something that you hang on the wall. A few years ago, I was on a panel in the UK Parliament, and on that panel was the Archbishop of Canterbury designate, and he said to me, Mr. Saw, he said, is your institute like so many that you go for the 3 Ps principle? I said, what's the 3 Ps? So he said, well, you sort of you produce an ethical code, you publish it, and then you pray that people will adhere to it. And I said to him, well, actually, Archbishop designate, we have a 4th P, we police it. And I think actually we need to be able to be much more upfront. Yes, there will be occasions when chartered accountants do not do the right thing. The important thing is to acknowledge that and to demonstrate that we have the public interest at heart, and that our procedures for dealing with errant members are transparent, clear, open, and that we will not tolerate deliberate misconduct. I think we've got a lot to do in this area to convince our markets, but I think it's absolutely fundamental if we're going to, in the future, never mind changes in technology, we can deal with those, but I think it's the public trust perception that is really our kind of Achilles heel at this particular point. Thank you.
So, Simon.
Yeah, look, I couldn't reiterate what Vernon said more. You know, the spirit of the profession is around all those principles. You know, trust is challenged. You know, you only need to look at what's going on in the world around the erosion of institutions, be they banks, be they the police force, be they anything which has sort of held up our society over the last few years. So, yeah, no, look, what we're good at is the trust dialogue. You actually look at where some of the firms are taking the trust piece and the audit piece, and they're creating whole new service lines around food provenance and things like that to prove to the consumer that their salmon or tuna was taken in a good way from the North Sea or wherever. And for us to be part of that, just resonates back to that we own the trust dialogue. And if we don't pick it up, not just in auditing, but in other things as well, and we don't take our place and resonate our place, police our place, we will lose it. And it's something that's being eroded at, and it's very easy to erode in a fake news, social media environment. And that's why I'm very glad to see that faith in social media news has declined, and there's a movement even back towards the trusted newspaper sources.
So you would say that it's more the societal trend that is the most important affecting you. Tasha, what do you see in your research as the most important trend?
I think we see all those trends as being critical. It's difficult to highlight one over the other, and I don't think they're new, quite honestly. The reality of it is, going back to talking about the past, I picked up a report the other day from one of our legacy bodies that talked about how the profession was going to respond to changes in technology, changes in environment, sustainability, changes in societal, demographic changes. The report was from 1968. So again, you go back to the fact that these aren't new. These discussions are not new. What is different? What is new? And I think what's different and new is the pace of change. It's the acceleration. It's the use of social media and digitization to be able to disseminate information that much more quickly. And it's really about the stakeholders having more of a dialogue and more of an interest because they have access to a lot more information immediately as it happens. And I think that's something that we're all going to have to work through as we look at our profession within the future. However, what I do think we need to is have a fundamental look at our own skills and competencies. And again, I could talk about digital skills, and we're all looking at how to incorporate that into our curriculum. We're talking about how to embed sustainability into our curriculum. There's no question about it, but there's more fundamental skills I think we have to look at as a profession, and that really comes down to three things for me. Number one is resiliency. You can't put in this world of incredible change and pace, you can't put a pin on a board and say this is where the profession's going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, because we just don't know. That's the reality. So what we have to teach and what we have to help our members be is, first of all, resilient. They have to be able to change with the times. They have to be able to fail, get right back on, try again, and learn that skill because it is a learned skill. The second thing we have to do is we have to be adaptable. So we can't be fixed in our ways of thinking. We can't be fixed in our ways of doing. We have to be willing to change, and we have to be willing to manage that change effectively and help our members as they try to navigate that change that's happening. And the third thing that comes into play for me in that space is we have to be innovative. And that means being innovative as professional bodies, innovative in terms of our curriculum, how we teach, innovative in terms of how we regulate, because that is fundamentally going to shift, I think, in the next few years as we look at new and evolving business models. We have an ecosystem within our environment where there are going to be non-members playing in our space. That's just the realities. And so how do we operate in a regulatory framework in that space? What do our business models look like going forward? And so the innovation is not just about technology, it's about processes, it's about regulation, it's about really how we innovate ourselves as professional bodies, but how we also help our members become more innovative in their own careers and the direction that they are moving in. So from CPA Canada's perspective, we're spending a lot of time looking at those core competencies, those really what we call enabling skills, resiliency, adaptability, and the ability to innovate, because I think that's what's really going to prepare both the profession and the members we serve for the future.
Thank you. Ronan, what do you see as the key trend that is impacting the profession in Ireland?
I think all of the 5 points listed, technology, economic uncertainty, and so on, all impact on us. I would highlight, just as one angle to think about, would be, I think, particularly in attracting young members into the profession. Many of them are much more attuned to some of these trends, particularly issues like sustainability. Many of them will be aware of the challenge to the environment and so on. And the traditional, if you like, narrow focus of just focusing on the short-term financial results are seen as potentially inadequate when you consider the longer-term impact on the environment. So as already mentioned, we would see firms moving into a much broader measurement of sustainable measures. And that, I think, is also something that's very attractive and resonates with potential members. I think it also resonates with chartered accountants' typical traditional skills, because the chartered accountant has always been responsible for the integrity, not only of themselves, but the integrity of the numbers. So in looking at how we are operating and is our fishing practices sustainable, people are looking for professionals with those competencies. So I think that's very important. I think the profession has shown phenomenal resilience and adaptability in terms of how it has evolved to changing business practices. But the pace of change today is, I think, the biggest challenge, and the sense of uncertainty and ambiguity that we all face. As we face, we could talk for a long time about some of the technologies, and we'll be moving on to that shortly. The difficulty is, I think, at times, is that we don't know where we will be. But I think I'm around long enough to remember when I think that all our jobs were presumed to be replaced by computers, and I think the profession has shown great strength in adapting in that space. But as I say, the pace of change is speeding up, and therefore we can't afford to be any way complacent.
And Mark?
We identified, I think, or the World Economic Forum identified 5 mega trends, but I think one of the things I observe is that our members over the years have been able to deal with all of those trends together. And there are very few other professionals that are able to deal with technology, economic uncertainty, societal trust matters, as we heard, sustainability, and even considering geopolitical matters. And we do that because we've got a multidiscipline qualification. Our members are very seldom expert in only one area. They're expert in many different areas, and they're used to dealing with these multiple factors. So I think we can deal with each of these items separately, and there's a huge concentration on technology. But if I was looking at one, I would probably pick on sustainability and scarce resources, which I think Tasha is a big change in 1968. And if you do work at all in Africa and you look at the aspirations of some of our friends in the professional bodies there, the limited resources is the huge, huge challenge for them. But then if you look at their environment, they've also got technology challenges, economic uncertainty challenges, and I think that very much the profession can see all of these trends brought together, and that's what our multidiscipline skills will help solve.
Okay. And from a regulator point of view, what are your biggest challenges?
Well, first of all, I think that they are self-described as long-term, and I think that's very important. Someone mentioned earlier in the 1960s, very similar lists could be made, and I expect that you could go out 3 decades from today and you could find a very similar list again. I will tell you that as a regulator, one of the words that we use a lot is about public reliance. I mean, the fact that CAs and CPAs are a trusted profession is incredibly important in all 5 of these areas. When when you go to a CPA or you go to a chartered accountant, you typically expect to have someone who is current, knowledgeable, and truthful. And I think polling in all of our countries has shown that when you look at professionals and you look at the public's regard and trust for professions, chartered accountants, CPAs are always near the top of the list. And there's a reason for that. And part of it is maintaining and progressing in each of these areas as they become more and more important in society. I can tell you, when you look at things like economic change, if you just look at a country like Venezuela and you look at where they were 10 years ago and where they are today, you can see how disruptive anything from political process to leadership to a lot of things that aren't really under the direct domain of an accountant, but how quickly they can change the expectation with inflation running to numbers that no one could possibly exist in a good way in any of our countries. So I use words all the time when I'm speaking in state houses and before the U.S. Legislation bodies. It's that the importance of having reliable accountants is really the underpinning of the financial wherewithal of the country. You know, it is a profession, and there might be competition, but the reality is it's that group of people who set the benchmarks and the measurements that protect us all from almost everything on this list. You know, in the United States, I was talking to one of the big firms yesterday. It's getting to be where a significant part of IT services in the United States are through big accounting firms. They certainly have a big part of sustainability measurement and monitoring in the United States. I know in Europe and somewhat in the United States, you're even starting to see more and more legal work done through an accounting perspective. So I think those are positive things. You know, very often when we talk about disruptors, I'm one of the people that believe that disruption means change, and change is usually positive. And I think that's where we are. But I will tell you that someone else mentioned how quickly things are evolving and changing. It's much more challenging to stay abreast of the changes now from a public protection and a regulator's perspective than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and I suspect that will continue in the future.
Thank you. Just to finish off this topic, I'm just going to do a bit of a speed round on specific initiatives that your institute or professional body is taking to assist and support members with these megatrends. We'll start with you, Tasha.
So I'm going to take the easy one. I'll take the technology one, being first to the post. We are taking a really deep look at our curriculum at all levels across the learning continuum. So from prerequisite education within universities and colleges to what we offer in our professional education program to what we provide to our members post-qualification. Because the reality of it is, you know, if someone was to ask me what keeps me awake at night, I'm pretty confident that our new CPAs coming out will have the technological skills that they need to succeed. What I worry about sometimes more is the more senior CPA who's in their career, who really doesn't have the opportunity to get good, solid learning around digital and technology and get those competencies and skills that they need, when in fact they probably got a 25 to 30 year, you know, career horizon still ahead of them. So we're very focused on both what happens at the certification level and what happens post-certification and in part of our professional learning and development. So what we are doing is we're taking our curriculum, we're looking at a lot of topics specifically related to data literacy and data management. So that includes data communication, so data visualization, data risk management, you know, looking at topics like privacy, like cybersecurity. We're looking at obviously AI, robotics, machine learning, AI systems design, risk management around controls, data integrity, how you apply professional skepticism to data. When the reality of it is that you just cannot necessarily trust every piece of data that's coming in to your environment, and how do you respond to that? How do you make sure that the data is appropriate and fit for purpose and allows good decision making? And so we're embedding that through our professional professional certification program. We are having conversations and we are developing curriculum to help our universities because, quite honestly, they're struggling as well with trying to embed this curriculum into their own programs. And we're also developing some pretty advanced certificate programs around data management and information management for our members post-certification. And that's all going to be happening within the next year. So we are investing financially very heavily in this space with the expectation that we're going to be able to help our members adjust to this new world.
Ronan.
Okay,
Specific.
I could echo some work we've done in that space in relation to technology. We're at the moment have launched recently a certificate for our members in the area of cybersecurity, and like Tasha mentioned, there are challenges both to embed it, these new technologies within our education program for new members, and then subsequently to support and facilitate our members when they go are in practice or working in industry over many years to keep abreast of many of these changes. But one of the other areas I'm just moving the conversation along, I'm going to talk a little bit about is economic uncertainty, because probably the biggest economic uncertainty facing the profession, at least one of them from an economic perspective, is the advent of Brexit. And whilst as a profession we are probably unique between the UK and Ireland in the sense that we operate both in the United Kingdom, in the north of Ireland, and also in the Republic of Ireland. So we see Brexit from two perspectives. We deal with two regulators, two governments, two legislators, and so on. So Brexit is creating a lot of uncertainty and concern potentially for members. And it touches on some of the areas we've already talked about. So we're depending on the nature and the ultimate outcome of Brexit. And if it is a hard Brexit, and we don't necessarily know what form that may take, but potentially we could have students training, for example, in Belfast in Northern Ireland, who will not automatically be able to gain audit rights in the Republic, and vice versa. So historically, we've been able to have a relatively fluid situation in the context. So how are we dealing with that uncertainty? Well, one of the areas certainly at this table, we are working with my colleagues in Scotland and in England and Wales to lobby and explain the issues to government. And that's both government in the UK and in Ireland, as well as at EU level. So we're having to operate at a number of different levels. Clearly, from a profession's perspective, a development like Brexit could potentially put artificial barriers in place to the level of mobility and flexibility that our profession has historically had. That's something we feel very passionate about. Our firms feel very passionate about this and trying to retain that. So the jury is out as to where we'll end up, but we do believe that this is something that the profession has to work very, very hard. And in the context of issues like this, unfortunately, a professional qualification, a designation, accountancy, audit rights are typically not top of a regulator's perspective. So we have to work very hard to get our concerns and the benefits of what our members are doing further up the politician's agenda and help challenge that.
Thank you. Mark.
I'll just pick on one area, which is sustainability. The Global Accounting Alliance, which all the bodies on the table, our countries at the table are involved with, is starting a new project looking at the content of qualifications and at CPD that we all set out to our members in the area of sustainability. Next week, the education directors of the GAA group will be discussing this, and we'll be working with the Chief Executive Group over the next 6 months as this project continues. This is very much tied into the UN development goals and concern about scarce resources, and is the profession doing enough? My own institute is working in a number of areas similar to what my colleagues have mentioned, but I think we would also want to highlight the work on mentoring and in communications to connect with members, because we do think that members' skill sets, both as members of a team and skills of individuals, are going through a rapid period of change. And working with other colleagues who are dealing with this either in a mentoring capacity or in discussion groups and in global communities, we think is very important.
Okay.
Well, let me just say quickly, when I listen to the responses, one thing that comes to mind as a regulator is that there's got to be a new level of nimbleness and in the relationship between the regulator and the institutes and the profession. These changes are happening rapidly, and very often accountants are dealing with older rules, statutes, standards, policies that have been in place for some time, and typically legislation isn't nimble. And there's got to be a recognition of the fact that we have to be more nimble, we have to be more fast reacting, and we have to be able to make the changes that accommodate the things that are occurring naturally, I think, in the marketplace.
Yep, thanks very much, Chair. So the ICOW, we are doing work around the UN sustainability goals, Sustainable Development Goals. Last autumn we launched a smartphone game, which was downloaded several tens, if not hundreds of thousands of times to get students, young people interested in the SDGs. We're working with the Natural Capital Coalition, Accounting for Sustainability, and also, as a number of the bodies around the table, we're working with the International Integrated Reporting Commission on integrated reporting. So that's a very quick summary of what we're trying to do.
And Simon?
Yeah, look, just quickly, it's really important that we just expose our membership to as many of these trends that are coming through. I'll give you an example which absolutely horrified me, which was when, and this robot has appeared on the Jimmy Fallon show, so please YouTube it. But we asked Sophia to come down and present to a group of our people in Canberra at one of our Leadership in Government Awards. And, when you see what's happening in that robotic space that's actually really personal and in a humanoid way, it really makes you think about where the world is going. So I think, look, across all these sorts of mega trends, we've got to put them into our curriculums. We've got to get our students to understand it all. I have great faith in the human endeavour, and I know change happens very quickly. But as someone said once before, we were all going to be surfing on the beaches for 3 days a week because computers were going to be doing all our work that we did 2 days a week. The reality is life just speeds up and life just gets faster. We've just got to process it faster.
Thank you, Simon. In the interest of time, I'm going to probably skip through some of these subjects that we have already touched on and covered, so we may go off a little bit off the script here. But one thing I do want to touch on is the disruptive technology, because it has been mentioned several times, and it's an area that I'm personally involved with, particularly around big data, Internet of Things or IoT, artificial intelligence, and blockchain in particular. These technologies will probably change the profession in ways that we don't fully understand yet, particularly in the AI space, and how professionals will do their work. For instance, robotic process automation may replace a lot of clerical staff, and you're ending up managing a whole bunch of robotic processes. That's already happening. And what I see coming down the line in AI is astounding. So in terms of these fundamentals, how it could actually change the profession, for instance, data analytics around audit, for instance. What do you see as the as some of these trends that could fundamentally change the profession around the technology? And I'll kick off with you, Simon.
Sure. Well, I think you're already seeing it. I mean, the large firms are investing a lot in spaces that are outside audit but are complementary to audit. Everything in an audit is some sort of valuation. And, these things are all being now created by great data dumps, and you've got mathematicians who are looking through all this stuff rather than sort of trained professional accountants. But at the end of the day, what happens is someone's got to, write an opinion, and someone's got to actually validate the stuff that's coming through from all these sort of data analysts. So I can see it happening almost immediately. As robotics comes into play, particularly if you're in a business environment, you've just got to make sure that you're the CA or you're the CPA who's managing those damn robots, because that's the value, and that's the bit that you can play into community. So blockchain, I must say, is something of a bit of a mystery. I think it really does need to be explained to us so that we can actually understand it in simple terms, and needs some good resonance around it. The thing that really troubles me about blockchain is not so much the blockchain and the distributed ledger piece, but how we actually regulate that piece, how the lawyers are going to get their head around writing new contracts and new language, how you'll actually get to defend those pieces in court. So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of trends, and look, accountants are always at the centre of it. So I'm pleased that hopefully we've got the knowledge to take it through.
Tasha?
I'm just going to highlight what you talked about with the audit data analytics. I think that's a really interesting space. It's not only going to change what we're auditing, because quite honestly, historical information becomes a little bit irrelevant. What we're seeing in our discussions is that users of financial information are looking for real-time validation. So it's going to change what you audit and hence how you audit as well. And those conversations are broad conversations to have. And I think that's the role the profession can play, is bringing in and bringing together all those stakeholders to look at that. So whether it's what kinds of questions an audit committee should be asking of the auditor in terms of how they're going to use data analytics, whether it's how the CFO prepares for a world where the information that they're producing is going to be subject to a data analytic kind of review in terms of doing an engagement, and of course the kinds of skills and competencies that auditors are going to need, those technological skills that they're going to need to be able to conduct those kinds of engagements is going to change. As will the reliance, and Simon, this is what you alluded to, as will the reliance that we have to place upon other players within our ecosystem, whether that's mathematicians, IT experts. We have to find solutions for us to work together with those other professionals in order to be able to have high quality, reliable audits. And so I think that's going to be an interesting space as we go forward to really think about how we work in that entire ecosystem.
And Ronan?
We are living, as I said earlier, in unprecedented change. There are huge opportunities that throws up. Just last week I was reading in relation to the impact of artificial intelligence, the risk in the context of artificial intelligence of people from a fraudulent perspective, perhaps undermining or challenging or using this as a way to misuse systems. Obviously, traditionally, the chartered accountant has played a significant role in the context of validating and maintaining and overseeing the integrity of the information. I don't think that's going to be any different going forward. The nature, as Tasha touched on, of what we do, and particularly how we do it, is going to change. The tools that we have available to us will change, but the need for the accountant to be able to interpret results, make sense of it, and as already said, to report on it and to give us some assurance around it, that is where the future lies. So it is an area of really exciting opportunity, is what I see coming down the tracks here for all our members. But it isn't one where you can look and say, what worked before will work again. We do need to play to the strengths of the chartered accountant. And I think if we do that, linking back to the issues of trust and integrity, I think we'll remain very strong.
Thank you. And Mark?
Accountants have always relied on experts, and I think over the last 20 to 30 years about reliance on actuaries, reliance on engineers and valuations, reliance on IT programmers. Moving into the next few years, we'll be relying on other experts, and the only way you can rely on an expert is if you can speak their language, or at least understand their language, even if you can't have a full conversation. So what we've got to ensure is that at IPD and at CPD, we're allowing our members and our future members to know enough of the language that they can rely on the experts that are going to be working in these other fields. And I don't think it's all just about technology skills, because the real use of things like data analytics moves into quantitative skills. And when I look at areas which I think have diminished in curriculums and in people's skill set over the years, the ability to work easily with mathematical formula, with probabilities, to look at risks, to be even better at forecasting, that's something that I think is a challenge in front of people. And I would also put the ability to communicate, because you're going to be communicating in different ways to different audiences. So communication skills has always been there. I would put quantitative skills right back in the forefront of the agenda, and the ability to speak the language of other experts in these evolving trends that we're seeing, and indeed potentially to speak to robots.
And Ken, from a regulator's point of view?
Probably my biggest concern and one of the things that keeps me up at night is our regulators keeping up the speed to adequately regulate. I mean, because we're going to need the same skills, the same education, the same understanding of blockchain, Bitcoin, data analytics, artificial intelligence as the practitioners. And I'm not sure we're there yet, so we're spending a lot of resources trying to do that. Another big step that AICPA and NASBA have recently announced is that we are looking at a new pathway to CPA that is not the current model, but the technology model. So it would be an equal weighted CPA that has a different type of education underpinning, knowing that kind of education and skills is going to be needed in the future. So we are working on that right now and throwing a lot of resources at it. So change is inevitable. Right now it moves so quickly. All of us have responsibility to keep up with that change.
Good.
Thanks. Just a couple of points. Always been mentioned the impact of artificial intelligence, particularly on the audit profession. One of the things that many of us grew up with as auditors, and many of our viewers to this panel will remember, is that most of the auditing standards are written around sampling. And of course, what you have with artificial intelligence, etc., is the ability, as has been mentioned, to do real-time 100% checks. And when you have a distributed ledger with blockchain, with all the parties having access to it, that is going to be a massive change in our profession. And there's a lot of discussion around auditing standards. There always has been and always will be. But I think this is going to be a real step change that we've all got to get our heads around. And the regulators too. Actually, how do you regulate an audit profession which is fundamentally driven by artificial intelligence? So I think there's some great challenges there, and I guess we're all looking forward to getting to grips with them. The last thing I would just say, as my sort of sign off on this panel, is, and this is an apocryphal tale which may or may not be true, the use of drones in stock takes. Many of us remember going into very cold warehouses and counting boxes and things. I heard a tale. A particular firm used to send 2 people in to count the boxes. Then they thought, hey, let's use drones. They can go up and down checking off the barcodes. So they sent in the 2 auditors and a team of 3 people to help them do the drones, the technicians. But it does, coming back to one of Mark's comments, maybe in the future, as well as coding and artificial intelligence, the professional qualification should include flying drones, so you don't have to send the support team. Thank you very much.
Well, we've run out of time, and I would really like to thank the panel. It's been a great discussion today, and it's, from my point of view, it's great to see the profession thinking ahead and really addressing the mega trends and moving the profession in the right direction, particularly with the global qualification and the mobility aspects, as well as recognising some of these disruptive technologies and addressing them. So thank you very much.
Thank you.